I'm pleased to introduce the other members of our first panel. I'll run through this real quick so that we stay on time. This panel will tackle the national security impacts of SBIR and delve even deeper than Dr. Feldman did, I think, into DoD and other national security implications. Our moderator is Dr. Arun Seraphin, to my immediate left. Arun is director of the Emerging Technologies Institute at the National Defense Industrial Association. He's also a former professional staff member of the Senate Committee on Armed Services, where he was responsible for oversight of science, technology, acquisition policy, including SBIR and STTR. Also joining the discussion to Dr. Feldman's left is Richard McNamara, a former Navy senior acquisition executive with deep experience as a user of SBIR and STTR to support the Pentagon's major weapons platforms. Mr. McNamara served as Deputy Program Manager for the Virginia-class attack submarine and Executive Director in the Program Executive Office for Submarines. And last but not least, Dr. Sujai Shivakumar is Director of Renewing American Innovation at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Dr. Shivakumar brings 2 decades of experience in policy and economic studies on U.S. competitiveness and immigration. He also recently co-authored a paper on SBIR and multi-award winners that outlines why veteran small businesses are essential to accelerating innovation. Without further ado, Arun, over to you.
Thanks very much, and really appreciate the organizers putting together this great event, and really appreciate you all taking the time to come to Capitol Hill and talk to your representatives and bring your small business perspective. When I did my 20-ish years up here, we really appreciated hearing ground truth from the companies and those people who were willing to take the time to tell us what's going on, because I will tell you the Pentagon always told us everything was going perfectly. So I really appreciate that, and thank you for doing this. The other thing I will say, given on 20 years, is I was usually the guy who stormed into the back of the room with a late senator and disrupted a carefully planned agenda. So I will have eyes open, and someone will signal, and we will get off the stage quickly, because this agenda is fantastic, and as people come in, you'll see us disappear. And I'm going to bring this in for a landing at 11:45, because everyone's got a flight in this room to get to. So what we want to talk about here is this sort of higher level national security implications of the program and help refine the discussion on how does this fit into broader defense modernization efforts. And those were the kinds of things I thought about as a Senate Armed Services Committee staffer, because SBIR was just one piece of a larger modernization pie. So we talk about things like, most importantly, how does it deliver cutting-edge capabilities to the warfighter? How does it do what everyone wants to do, expand the innovation and industrial base that the nation can depend on for new capabilities? We're in a constant competition now, especially with foreign adversaries and the natural speed of technology development to be able to deliver things into use as fast as possible. So how does the program tie into this need for speed? And then, how does it fit in the broader context of broader modernization strategies? Now, like all programs, no program, Maryann did a great job of this, no program is perfect, so hopefully we weave in, based on the great experience we have here, helpful suggestions. We used to call it constructive whining about the program, right? That maybe we can make some changes to the program. So with that, I'm going to ask some questions to the panelists. Hopefully we get some discussion, and then at the end, I'd love to get your questions, especially things that you channel from the conversations maybe that you had over the last 24 hours with some of the with some of your members. So let me start with what might be the most important thing. SBIR, like all R&D efforts in the Pentagon, main goal is to develop and transition useful capabilities to the warfighter, to the operational use. The dual use technology is a nice to have. The expansion of the industrial base is nice to have. In the end, you're trying to deliver capabilities to the warfighter. So Dick, you have this extensive background, and I'd love for you to talk about it for a couple of minutes. Working on the acquisition side, how did you think of the program as an element in that goal to deliver technologies?
Well, thanks. I had the opportunity to think about this from an acquisition standpoint, who had been paying SBIR taxes throughout the 1980s, and finally, about 1990, I got into writing my first topic. And so my point was that this was money and the opportunity for innovation to do things that help my programs be more successful. And so that's what I structured my acquisition strategies to be able to pursue that. And then during the 1990s, we were very successful with a company called DSR that did, today everybody assumes your software is going to be portable from vendor to vendor and generation to generation. At the time, that was not the case. And what we found was that, hey, we had a lot of skills and capabilities in small businesses that we never saw. They were always hidden behind a prime. Not to beat up primes, but that was the fact that we could have direct access to them. And the SBIR provided the means to be able to do that. And we were very successful during the 1990s with a program called the Acoustic Rapid COTS Insertion Program, where we finally jumped on board the COTS bandwagon, rolled that into the mainstream programs, but still would have it pass shock and vibe and all those other things. And about that same time, peace broke out, the Seawolf program was canceled, and I was assigned to worry about combat systems for Virginia class. And so again, using what I had seen occur in SBIR, we built a whole combat system, not just one subsystem, all around the SBIR program. We had a basic prime, Lockheed Martin, who ended up learning to become an integrator and ultimately set up facilities where SBIR companies would come in and demonstrate their stuff. So in addition to competing to become an SBIR Phase 1 winner, by the time they got to Phase 2, their products were being able to be evaluated against their peers. That continues today. And so I guess the real thing that I saw is that making acquisition programs take advantage of that. I always talk about planning for success. It takes at least three things to happen. You got to have a problem to solve. You got to have money to solve that problem. And then you got to have a contract to be able to get access. Those three things are the keys that I continually try to work. But I'd go on for more, but let me just stop at that.
So Maryann, you talked about the mission agencies in your various looks at the program. What are your thoughts on how DoD is making use of the program to transition these technologies?
Very good. And so I talked a lot about the quantitative research that we've done, but we've also done a lot of interviews with program officers, interviews with decision making, trying to understand how are topics defined, where do they come from, and then how are they integrated into impacting the capabilities of the warfighter. And so, there is a tremendous amount of variation. And I'm looking at Gail Cohen. I don't want to give away a lot of details, but because our report is not released yet. But, this is not happen chance. This is not sort of a process like we were, sort of just talking to Warren about venture capital, where, you just put a lot of spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. What we have instead is very deliberate planning on intricate systems. What is it that we need? And I've been so impressed with the ability of the program officers to really sort of understand who they're working with, especially in DoD, where this procurement function is so real. And to then think about, well, what are primes providing? They do a lot of matchmaking between firms and primes for subcontracting opportunities. And so there is this sort of dynamism in the system. There's been a lot of talk about open topics, and the difference with open topics is for a firm, you come to me and tell me what you have. It's sort of as as a vendor, here's what I can provide for you. But the way the SBIR system works at DoD is defining specific topics that will really serve and advance their function. So it is not left to chance, and it is seems to be functioning very well.
And Sujai, Maryann dutifully complained about DoD's acquisition system, which I think is required. Yeah, which is fine. It's my fault, probably, all the clever NDA provisions I wrote over the years. But you've been thinking a lot about the valley of death and how we turn federally funded innovation into actual national security, jobs, healthcare, whatever outcomes. How does SBIR fit into this constant struggle to get things into production and use?
So the valley of death really refers to this situation where these innovative companies find themselves in. It's what economists like Dr. Feldman call, an information asymmetry. So you have the entrepreneur who understands what the technology is and what its promise is, as well as potentially what its commercial capabilities are. But the venture capitalist or the other financier doesn't know what that is. And so what SBIR does is to actually put a flag. So it's been through 2 phases of evaluation. This program, this technology, therefore, not only is technologically sound, but it also has commercial legs. That then crowds in, additional investments, helps the company scale up, helps to build its capability to then take that technology and build it up to something that is, whether it's I think again there was two diagrams, one of a Mars rover and one of a aircraft, whether it's a technology that fits into one of the systems within those larger technological platforms, or whether it's something for the civilian market. These are ways of scaling up our within our innovation ecosystem. I just want to, before, and some prefatory remarks, just put the SBIR program where it is today in some historical context. So if you think about our innovation system today is itself a national security asset. We're used to thinking about national security typically in terms of ships and planes and tanks, but the innovation system itself, the complex interconnections between research, capital, manufacturing, workforce training, and all the other parts of the ecosystem. Each of these are interconnected, and each of these have to work. But there's also it's not only just our research system or our capital system, but there are interfaces between the two of them. Think of them as gears or the teeth of a set of gears. They both have to work together. So what SBIR does is actually make sure that those teeth are matching and that each system is driving the other. So the research system is then connected to the capital system, and that and they both turn in sympathy with each other, strengthening our innovation system, which, as I mentioned, itself is a national security asset. So it's really central to this question that you asked.
And Dick, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you were working for the PEO side of it. You're judged by the transitions. And so are there particularly, particular aspects of the program that make it more beneficial than, let's say, traditional Navy S&T to promote transition?
Oh, yes. SBIR, the way I've tried to introduce it to program offices is when they would have a problem, I would say, well, the first choice is SBIR. I'll use this as an example. It's a real one, but there's a company, Prime was having a problem with a subcontractor. They didn't know what they were going to do. They couldn't get the power supply to work. So I said, okay, well, let's take a look and see who's done power supply work in the past, find that company, and get them on board with what I call a reach back phase 2. Because there's no time limit between a phase 1, 2, and a 3. These programs never died. So you can reach back and within 3 months have somebody working on today's dollars, $2 million worth of power supply work. So you get an expert, accessible when you need them. And to me, that was a great help. And you could do it for obsolete components. You can do it for, I'll call accessory things that we had forgotten that we had to buy. And these are all opening the doors for small businesses based upon work they've done. without having to go to brand-new topics and wait 18 months to find out who a Phase 1 winner might be. So to me, so tech insertion, obsolete equipment replacement, second sourcing to handle capacity issues, and then, of course, tech insertion from a capability upgrade standpoint. Those are the three things that I found most useful to get people on board, in addition to them writing topics. And as was mentioned, the topics that get advertised are usually a problem or an anticipation of a problem. So there's a landing pad and an interested party who's doing technology pull, rather than somebody inventing something and trying to push.
So Sujai mentioned the information asymmetry, and I want to talk about market failure, which is one of the most important justifications that economists use. And it relates to the financing of innovation. So the SBIR program helps firms transverse the valley of death, but sometimes it just leaves them hanging there. And this would require then multiple SBIR awards to keep going and making progress. The sort of expectation that venture capital will come to the rescue and will invest in companies that are making very bespoke components is just a fallacy. And so I would contend that America doesn't have an innovation problem. We have a financing problem. We have an investment problem. We have relied on a system of venture capital that is incredibly conservative and mimetic, and that is not investing in the essential technologies that we need for this new economy and for increased international competition.
It always struck me that we used to complain about transition rates in SBIR, but from a Hill staffer perspective, it was actually the only program that had any remote chance of measuring transition rates because there was a concept of phase 3, right? I, at one point in my life, was a DARPA employee. It turns out DARPA invented everything, right? Just ask us, right? But whether there's proof of any of that, well, that's a different question, right? But at least there is a phase 3 concept. There's no similar concept for the rest of the S&T portfolio or anything else that happens in DoD. And so the metrics of transition are actually better in the SBIR program. The other thing I always was interesting to me was contracting was always viewed as one of the big challenges to crossing the valley of death. Whoever wrote this thing back in the ancient days cleverly created this sole sourcing mechanism that allows you to pull things across the valley. In fact, we copied it multiple times when you think about other transaction authority. We totally inspired by what was already going on in SBIR to be able to pull R&D projects into prototyping and production. We did it again with prizes. We actually done it with BAA authority. I did it a bunch of times. It was all copying what was already going on in SBIR. And so if the department is focused on improving technology transition, there's very few programs that are already pre-positioned to help pull things across. I just don't know that the department thinks about it quite that way yet. So another major modernization goal that all of the senior leaders are talking about now is the expansion of the industrial base, whether I'm talking about the manufacturing side or the innovation side. And Maryann, I think you talked about this a little bit, but talk about how the program is being used as an entryway for new entrants into the industrial base.
I don't think I've ever been to a meeting with economic development officials talking to entrepreneurs where they have not mentioned the SBIR program. And really, one of the metrics that economic development agencies use to evaluate themselves is how many applicants do they have coming in, and are those applicants successful? We see that the SBIR program is used as a device for many small companies to spin out of universities. And so there is that sort of dynamism. It is, and again, I think I'm really coming down hard on venture capital, they use getting an SBIR award as a symbol of promise in a technology. The federal government has vetted that technology to say that it has potential, it has legs. And so the program serves this function. We see across the United States that there are the diffusion of programs to provide information about the SBIR program and to help with applications. There's been a rise in matching funds by states that allow them to give companies a little extra runway. And this suggests to me that this ought to be a national program where we help more companies access this program, and we also should increase the award amounts. I mean, this is one of these programs where we don't have any cost of living, cost of materials inflator. And so it's getting much more expensive to do science. And so, we're just taking this program and pounding it. We're going to just have all these restrictions. We're not going to provide adequate resources for companies to be able to really succeed. I want to just mention, as a researcher, we always need to have a robust sample size. I've looked at a variety of firms that received, it was actually all of the firms that received SBIR funding in 2013. And I wanted to see what had happened and to trace these. And, we're able to do a lot of matching, but really I had a small army of undergraduates, and let's see, did these companies change their name? Were they merged? Were they acquired? And we found that a significant proportion of them had gone out of business. And when we looked at these companies, and again, doing this sort of looking at press releases, what we found was that companies had won business plan competitions. They had received, they looked so promising, and I don't have the exact numbers, but disproportionately they were acquired by Japanese, Korean, and German firms. So this is technology that we developed that subsequently there was not enough investment, and then the firms were sold. And that is a real net loss to the American economy. I think that we should be concerned about this. So I want to say let's not lean so heavily on this small program. Also, let's not serve this program up to venture capital by requiring follow-on investment. Let's sort of really try to understand how we increase our manufacturing capability, how we take all of the wonderful technologies. Every university that I go to, and I just go to a lot, and I'm interested in meeting with scientists and seeing what technology that they're developing. There is just so much going on that's really exciting and that has great potential, and we should not let these ideas lay fallow. And this program is an important vehicle.
And so, Dick, and part of this expanding the industrial base that the services can depend on for the future acquisition programs, for the future procurement is, it's sort of a ticket to the amusement park and welcome to this house of horrors called DoD acquisition, right? But one of the things you were really good at was having them find their way into the program and do the things that turns them into viable contractors. So talk about how your PEOs sort of worked at turning these initial phase one awardees into actual defense contractors.
Well, one of the things that the Navy has done a very good job on was doing outreach to promote the program, to get companies engaged, to write that first, back then it was 20-page, now it's a 10-page proposal, to try to figure out whether they can have a solution to the problems that we face. Once they submit, and on average, we would get about 15 proposals per topic. We would make 2 phase one awards in general. When I was evaluating them, I remember getting 63 at one time to evaluate. But So that was a poorly written topic. So you get them on board. The first phase is, $250K, $150K for 6 months to get to know you, to see whether the company has a concept that's going to work, whether it makes sense, whether it fits your need. Typically, we'll down select to one or two companies in phase 2, where you put up real money. In today's dollars, that's a couple $1 million over 24 to 30 months, generally. That's where you can really test them and see if they can manage $2 million, satisfy the contract requirements, and deliver on your concept. If they can, well, then you'd be willing to go give them a bigger phase 3. If they can't, then they got to go to school. The Navy has schools set up. We do the STP, SBIR transition program. It's run out of ONR. They hire a contractor to assign an advocate to act as kind of a mentor to help the companies navigate the opportunity forums that they have. Who's the people in charge? Who's going to make the decision whether they actually get funded for any follow-on work? And I think that goes a long way to keeping the companies engaged and making them smarter. I always encourage companies, if they've taken that, to use the TABA money. It used to be called discretionary technical assistance. It's non-fee bearing, but you can invest it for your own benefit, whether it be equipment or other things. That's a tool that we have in place. So there's a variety of ways of making these companies get engaged. Second piece is that, back to the primes, we started making small business development plans, small business subcontracting plans, and evaluated criteria for contract award. And then we would impose an incentive or a penalty on it if they didn't execute it. And that changes the attitude of a company very much when you do that. And they'll bring in SBIRs, but they'll also bring in, women-owned or 8A or whatever other areas. But again, it's the demand signal, again, that we are able to put out. So I guess the one point I would make is that this stuff doesn't just happen, okay? The program offices, the executives in there have to structure things that incentivize the right results that you get. So if I invest in a particular product, the companies are doing great, how do I get them to be on the prime team? Or how do I get them to do a GFE? If I'm going to modernize something over a 30-year life cycle of a ship, I'm going to own it, and I'm going to use SBIR to get it on the ship initially and then do the life cycle maintenance of that. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that those are kinds of things that you can do.
So Sujai, as you try to expand the industrial base, the innovation base, using SBIR or any tool, you're inevitably going to deal with, especially today, contractors who you're not used to dealing with, and who might have undue influence from foreign sources or money coming in from places you don't like, or different motivations than you want in the national security establishment. So this question of due diligence over, while you're simultaneously trying to expand the industrial base, how should the SBIR program be thinking about balancing those two things?
Well, there's sort of two strategies. One is defensive and one is offensive. So let me go to the offensive one first and then get to the other part. So, just again, to put some historical perspective, when we put together the basic framework of our innovation system in the post-war era, it was very much focused on research because back then our industrial base was more or less intact following the Second World War. We were really trying to build up our research R&D capabilities. So we were, we stood up the National Science Foundation, expanded NIH, built a number of the DoD and DOE labs, so on and so forth. And so now we have a really fantastic idea engine coming out of our research and R&D innovation. Meantime, our industrial base has eroded for a number of reasons. SBIR came up in an era where that early model was in time for a refresh. So it was in the 1980s. Not only was a period of SBIR, but STTR, Bayh-Dole, Stevenson-Weidler, et cetera. Those sets of laws basically try to transfer technologies from universities, from the labs, into the marketplace, and they did that very well. Today, the challenge is a little different because, as Dr. Feldman again pointed out, a lot of these, we have our competitors as well as our rivals taking our ideas and then scaling them up. And so a lot of our investments in SBIRs and DARPA technologies, et cetera, are now finding that they are being capitalized, they're being manufactured with the economic benefits accruing to other countries. So the offensive part is that we need to make sure that SBIRs are capturing these ideas and building them up so that we are able to more effectively capitalize on our investments in R&D. So that's the one part. The other part is that, yes, the fact that if venture capitalists can recognize that SBIR companies have technological and commercial potential, so do our rivals and adversaries. And so the issue is that these companies are small, by definition, and they need to be given further support to be able to make sure that their technology, that they observe the needed precautions and hygiene to make sure that their technologies are secure. So we need to do both, and I think that's perhaps a broader answer than you had expected, but there we go.
I always found the cognitive dissonance of hearing that SBIR program, it doesn't deliver anything, and the Chinese are stealing all the secrets out of the program, right?
Right.
You hear that? Okay, I'm not sure what to do with that. Okay. I want to go to questions, but I want to ask you one more before we turn it over to them. There's a lot of discussion about flexibility in the structure of the program now, flexibility for the program managers, and concerns that maybe there's too much, maybe there's too little. What are your thoughts, based on your perspectives, on how people on the Hill who are thinking about readjusting the program should think about current program flexibility in terms of how they manage the program and execute the program, or where legitimately we should be constraining some things?
Yeah. So, it's sort of a pet peeve of mine. I think the small business and the small business committees and both sides of the Capitol, it's the SBIR program, and before Dr. Cohen and Dr. Feldman started this third round of reviews of the SBIR program, I was the lead staff for the first round, and I directed the second round of reviews for the SBIR program across all the 5 major agencies. Bottom line is the program works, and as Senator Markey said, it ain't broke, so don't fix it. Just reauthorize it for lengthy periods of time so that the program has stability and it can do what it is designed to do. The program works. It has been emulated across the world, which is another sign that it works, and it has been delivering, and it has paid for itself multiple times in terms of the technologies that it has fostered. So, I think the problem is that you have a program that works and that you really can't do too much more with the program, and you have these committees that are trying to, are geared to churn stuff. So our policy challenge today is not so much trying to further refine the SBIR program. It's fine, just reauthorize it. The challenge really is in the scale-up part of the effort. We need to actually have the Chinese, the Japanese, the Europeans, others have active manufacturing strategies in terms of their policy frameworks. We don't have that either either within the executive branch or the legislative branch. We don't have the policy infrastructure to kind of grow our manufacturing sector and put the attention really squarely on that part of the equation. So if we have congressional staff looking for things to do, I would rather they invest their efforts in trying to build. We have SBIR, we have all this good stuff. We have a world-class R&D infrastructure. what happens after that? We shouldn't have the situation that Dr. Feldman talked about where you have these SBIR companies and they don't know how to scale up, and therefore they then become acquired by Japanese firms, by German firms, by Chinese firms. That should not be happening. We should be, our domestic innovation system ought to be absorbing these technologies very rapidly and scaling them up and doing that for the benefit of the US economy.
I used to be able to turn on these angry lights here in front of us, but I can't. But between us, we have about 4 minutes, so go ahead and be flexible when you're talking about flexibility. Quick. Yeah.
About flexibility, okay. The program today is extremely flexible. In fact, it's almost too flexible as it is. And if you start levying more of these proposed ideas onto it, we'll be spending all our time trying to figure out what we can do rather than actually do anything. And so I find the program, when people come in and say, where do I go? To literally say, hey, we can give you a reach back phase 2. We can let you go into an open topic that's going to be getting advertised. We have just a variety of different things. We also, I look across the board. I've taken drones from the Department of Agriculture as compared to just within, the Navy stuff. I have looked across Department of, NASA. I've taken topics from DHS and vice versa. So the program is about as flexible as it needs to be. If there was one area that I would look at, it was increasing the flexibility of procurements for phase 3s and trying to speed that up. Invest in contracting officers or give warrants for maybe smaller values for the up to 10 million instead of 2. But my flexibility was typically phase 1, phase 2, phase 2 CRP, commercialization readiness, and that bought the time for me to get the paperwork in place for a phase 3. When I put a phase 3 in, I would go to the highest amount of dollar value I could within the organization, because if it was a smart thing for the submarine community, the surface guys would probably want on board, the carriers would want on board, and I wanted to make it convenient and accessible to other people who could use those technologies. So there's flexibility in the program, but how we implement it, we can build in flexibility as well.
And I think the flexibility is key. I want to say that, one of the things, and looking at multiple award winners and the bad press that they get, I'm trying to understand this. And I think the term was coined in 1992 in an OMB report. And at that point, there was much greater concentration because the program was young and the ecosystems were not developed. And so there was a higher concentration. The number of awards going to repeat firms has declined over time as this ecosystem has become more vibrant. I think also the idea that we would have copying between agencies. NSF instituted a policy of one and done, and they will deviate from that when they see promising technologies. But in our report, what we found was that NSF, as the basic science agency, will fund early discoveries and advance them to the point where firms subsequently get SBIR awards from other agencies, from the mission agencies. And that is part of the dynamism of the system that we want to encourage, because one and done works at NSF or has been implemented doesn't mean it should be pushed through the rest of the system.
And the only thing I'd add on flexibility is, from my perspective, I served on the PPBE commission that fixed Pentagon budgeting, just in case you didn't notice. We came to the conclusion that this is the most flexible R&D program from a perspective of budgeting. Think about it. You don't have to, DoD phrasing here, POM for the SBIR program. You don't have to pre-program or fight with your service about what you're going to spend the money on. Those decisions can be made much later. You have the advantage in contracting, so that flexibility doesn't exist. It's also a program that doesn't have to be appropriated by the appropriators, nor can it be cut by the appropriators. It's a program that really has what DoD calls budget activity tied to it. It can be spent on almost anything, ranging from basic research to prototyping. There is no other program within DoD with that amount of financial flexibility. I don't think the department uses it for that perspective, but I think they could when you're trying to think about all the other things we talked about with speed and flexibility and expanding industrial base. With that, I'm going to ask you are all going to have to submit your questions for the record, classic hearing style, because I think the next step in the agenda is I want to thank our panelists for this great discussion. Thank you very much.